Hello, good evening. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. This is such a wonderful crowd. My name is Amali, and I'm the events director here at Books Are Magic. Before we get started, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. First off, we do ask that you keep your mask on at all times while at the event. We'll be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the conversation, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Matthew will be signing and personalizing books at the table next to where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And lastly, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of The Sense of Wonder online using the link in the live stream description. All right, with all that in mind, we're so excited to have Matthew Salisis and Kirstin Chen with us tonight to celebrate the launch of Matt's newest novel, The Sense of Wonder. Woo! This book has so much in it to talk about, so I'm just going to get straight to the author introductions so that we have as much time as possible. Matthew Salisis is the author of the national bestseller Craft in the Real World, the 2021 finalist for the PEN/Faulkner Award for Fiction Disappear Doppelganger Disappear, and 2 other novels. Adopted from Korea, he has written about adoption, race, and Asian American masculinity in the Best American Essays 2020, NPR's Code Switch, the New York Times blog Motherlode, and The Guardian, among other media outlets. He lives in New York City, where he is an assistant professor of writing at Columbia University. And as I mentioned earlier, Kirstin Chen joins Matt in conversation tonight. Kirstin is the New York Times bestselling author of 3 novels. Her latest, Counterfeit, is a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, a Roxane Gay book club pick, and a New York Times editor's choice. Her previous novels are Bury What We Cannot Take and Soy Sauce for Beginners. All right, that's all from me. Without any further delay, please join me in welcoming Matthew and Kirstin.
It's like somebody's dropped this mic at some point. Thank you so much for that. Thanks everyone for coming. I've had an interesting day full of online trolls and real life trolls. So I thought I would read an appropriate section of the book. So actually, and we'll probably get into this, but I wrote this book in 2 parts. The first part about a Jeremy Lin type basketball player, Asian American basketball star, who has a short rise to fame, and then the media comes down on him after he loses. And then the second half about a producer of K-drama who wants to bring K-drama from Korea to America, and they're dating because I like love stories. So I'm going to read from one section. That's the name of the basketball player. When he has his winning streak, they call it the Wonder. It's a pun on his name. And this is after he's been voted into the All-Star game. The chapter is called Run-ins with Whiteness. Back in New York, after All-Star weekend, I ran into a fan on 9th Avenue, a white dude wearing my jersey over his coat in the cold. The Knicks were making millions off my name, my number, putting it on any piece of clothing they could. None of that money came to me. I'd splurged 1/5 of my salary on the Escalade that I rarely drove, except to the practice facility. And the city was faster and easier to catch a ride, one of the things I could do that black players rarely did. I needed the contract to come through and confirm that I was worth the kind of money that would allow me to live that Escalade life. I was guaranteed nothing until I signed a long-term deal to stay in New York, which everyone said would happen and no one would promise. I wanted to know what my fan thought about how his money went to the NBA, the team, the distributor, the merchant, etc., and not me. I wanted basically to confront him with my reality, to make him see me and not my number. Okay. Nice duds, I said. He jumped back and I saw that I had had an effect. Just give me a second, Ken. He was a little guy with a certain hawkishness about him. Like at any moment, he might tell you about a war he'd been in. What the hell? He said, as if he hadn't seen me there. I waited. You're a Wonder Boy fan, huh? He said. I thought he was joking at first, doing a white guy bit, looking down on me even though he was literally looking up. I smiled to put him at ease, doing my Asian guy bit. I guess all of you are Wonder Boy fans, he said sincerely. I kind of thought that at that time, any tall Asian dude was getting asked if he was me. White people say we all look alike because they really can't tell the difference. What they mean is they don't know how to look. I thought maybe this guy was so sensitive to his own racism that he couldn't even assume I was the guy on his jersey. I'm one, I said, putting out my hand, trying to give him an excuse to correct himself. You even got the same name, must be common. He stepped back. He wasn't putting two and two together, though. He just wanted to be a little further away from me. Suddenly, he shook like something had reached up from under the ground and was pulling him down into hell. He shook like he had to get out of its grip. He pulled off his jersey and coat. Underneath, he wore a black t-shirt that read, "Be calm and love each other." And he yelled, "Cockroach," at me and shook and shook. Cockroach, I thought. Where have I heard that before? Then I saw a cockroach scuttle away. The white dude jabbed a finger at it, and I realized he meant a real cockroach, and also that the cockroach had accomplished what I had not. Confronted him with its reality. Thanks.
Thanks for that reading, Matt. I think it captures so much about what I love about this book. Like, it's so funny and incisive and also horrifying at the same time. And that passage really had it all.
Thank you.
So I thought we'd start at the beginning. And in your acknowledgments, you write that the first half of the book is indebted to Robert Boswell's excellent prompts. And so I wondered if you could share a couple of these prompts with us and talk a little bit about how your book came together.
Yeah, sure. So I started this book in like 2014, maybe 2015. And I was in my PhD program at that time at the University of Houston. And I was taking a class with Robert Boswell called, I don't know, I think it was just like Forms of the Novel or something. And what we were doing was we had read, I think I remember telling you about this. We read 4 novels, but we read all of the beginnings at the same time, and then we read all the middles at the same time, and then we read all the endings at the same time. I actually teach a version of this course now because it was so fun. And each novel had a different form. So one was like a novel in stories, one was a kind of like a novel in modules or like flash kind of. One was much more traditional. One was like Age of Innocence, very traditional novel. And so we were rewriting the same novel every time in these different forms. So every week we had to write another version of this.
Yep.
And imagine the entire novel so that we could write the version that we were writing. And Boz would give us these like 14-page long prompts, and we had to write like 5 pages. And the prompts were amazing. And so at the end of this class, I had like 77 pages or something. I remember I was asking Boz what we were supposed to do, and he was like, "Oh, you just, obviously you just fill in the parts in between." And I was like, "No, that's a very unsatisfying answer." Thank you, and so when I went back to look at the novel again a couple of years later to fill in the parts that were missing, I still thought, "Oh, this is not going to be fun." And so I actually asked Boz to send me all the prompts from the class a couple of years earlier, and he would very graciously just send all these, probably like 100 pages of prompts.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a new beginning, middle, and end of the novel from Carrie's perspective, and then I tried to like jimmy them together until after many years I was able to figure it out, maybe.
So which of the novels ended up inspiring the form of this?
That's a good question. It's actually one of the prompts early on was like to borrow the opening from another book. And so I remember borrowing from The Sun Also Rises. And so Brit is a play on bread, and Robert as a play on Robert from that book. And even the opening, which is like right after a joke, which I like. But after that, one who's the narrator is kind of like bashing on Robert's song or kind of explaining his life in the way that one sees it. And that's borrowed from The Sun Also Rises too. But in the end, you know, I kind of just made them all into my style, which is like these short chapters that move quickly and are hopefully pretty funny.
Yeah, no, it's would not have guessed Sun Also Rises. But also it's interesting because you mentioned that one of those books was a novel in flash fiction. And I think because of the chapter titles, this book does have a little bit, like each of those chapters feel almost like a standalone story. And the chapter titles were one of my favorite things. I admired so many things about this book, but that was one of the many things I admired. And I'm always so impressed when writers take on chapter titles because titles are typically very difficult for writers, and so to do it 50 times instead of one time seems very virtuosic. What was the importance of the chapter titles for you?
I love titles. I mean, I actually titled Kirstin's first book, so I saw she was doing this. But I think of them as like ways to get in a joke or like things that you left out or had to cut from the chapter, or to like hit on the themes in a way that is like telling you kind of how you could read it, but not like straight on, right? Like coming at from at an angle. And so it wasn't really a challenge as much as it was just kind of fun for me. And I was trying to figure out, I'm always trying to figure out like, you know, ways to make the writing process more fun since it takes so long.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One of your titles early on in the book is Disappear, Doppelganger, Disappear, and the true Matt Salis' fans will know that that's the title of his previous novel, which was the PEN/Faulkner finalist, Disappear, Doppelganger, Disappear. So can you talk about why this theme of doppelgangers is so prevalent in all your work?
I think it's because I'm adopted, but also just, you know, living in this country is not like a cis het white man. Probably you have some feeling of like not being the person that everybody wants you to be all the time. And so I often kind of feel separated from the person that people think I am. You know, today is a case in point, but most days I kind of feel that way.
Do you feel like this is an extension of what you were exploring in your last book?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. I think in general, Kirstin was going to send me questions beforehand, and I was like, no, just surprise me.
It's like it'll be more fun if you surprise me. Is it fun?
Yeah, it's fun. I like coming up with it on the spot. But I think sometimes we're just kind of like going over the same territory right over and over again. You're like, as you have a certain territory that is yours, and then you're kind of like adding to it. I also thought, like at one point I thought, if you knew anything really well, like so well, you would eventually know everything because everything's connected, right? Like if I knew how to write a novel well enough, then I would see it's also connected to like the power systems that, you know, take control of our lives and the history of storytelling and the reason that people are people, humans, and why we settle down and have a stupid agricultural society. And right, like I think if you kind of follow anything far enough, you'll kind of learn about all these other things. So as you're kind of working in your territory, I think you kind of like add land to that territory. I mean, not in the colonizing way, maybe, but right, just trying to figure out the surrounding situation. So I think this is still in that territory, but maybe kind of looking at different parts of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. You talked about this a little bit when you were answering my first question about how the novel came together, but for those of you who haven't read the book, this is a book that has two distinct narrators. So Wan Li is clearly the main character, but then there's also Carrie, who, as Matt said, is his girlfriend and also a producer of K-dramas. And then you also have these two really interesting interludes, which are kind of K-drama primers, directed at the reader, it seems like. Can you talk about the different parts of the book and how you spliced them together?
Yeah, it took a lot of kind of like just trial and error, moving things around, and the K dramas really helped a lot. There were ideas that I had written down for K dramas at some point in time, and thought these would be great K dramas. But I don't have any connection to the K drama industry. Also, don't speak Korean really, so it'd be a hard sell, I think.
So the
But
K dramas came first?
no, well, in a way, maybe. I think
Interesting.
one of them is probably around the same age as the rest of the idea for the book. So I've had these kind of like spinning around for a while. There was a point where I thought I was watching City Hunter, I think. And I was thinking, if you have a good enough idea, the rest kind of like writes itself, right? Like City Hunter is an idea where it's like anybody could execute that idea and they would have an excellent show. Or like, what's the one with the train that goes around the world and you just go from the back of the train to the front of the train?
Snowpiercer.
Oh,
Snowpiercer, yeah, like that one, that writes itself. You have to go from
You
one
did tell me
place
that
to
once,
another,
yeah.
right? And so I really wanted to have an idea like that, and I couldn't exactly get there, but I had these ideas that I think are pretty good ideas for shows. But they were just kind of sitting around, waiting for an opportunity to be used, like most things. And so this seemed like the time to do it. And at first I just kind of had them as Carrie's like shows that she was working on. But then I realized at some point, I'm kind of not remembering exactly what happened, but that they could be their own thing in the novel. And as soon as I put them in, it seemed like a good way to introduce the ways in which the story was already kind of working in my head for somebody who's kind of unfamiliar with how K-drama works.
And so was Carrie always a K drama producer? Did you know that that would always be her
Yeah,
role?
she always was, because I said this before, but I just wanted to write something where I could legitimately say I was researching by watching K-drama. You know, this was sometimes like a thing that came up in my marriage where I'd be like, I'm writing. Like, you're watching TV. I'm like, no, well, you know, it's all writing. But I needed like a real excuse to do that, so this was the excuse.
Speaking of K drama, I know you've had some TV interest in this book. And when you told me about it, you said, I really wish someone would just make the K dramas instead of optioning the whole story. Why do you think that? And you know, what does K drama mean to you?
So my agent is here and can attest to the fact that I asked her to do this. But I actually do think they'd be really good shows. I'm just putting that out into the world. Always putting that out into the world. But they're the shows that I pretty much exclusively watch. I kind of watch only K-drama and then like bad like Japanese dating shows, Terrace House. So like I actually find them so comforting and also like, you know, extremely watchable and extremely well produced. Right, there's a level of production that goes into like HBO shows that is like always a thing on K-dramas. And then there's also like, for me, they're the closest form to a novel, right? It's like 16 episodes or so, and there's a clear beginning, middle, and end, right? The entire show is aimed toward reaching the ending, and they're never kind of like holding out for, well, until Netflix got involved, they were never holding out for extra seasons. And the timing of like a 16-hour movie, I think that's pretty analogous, maybe a little long, but pretty analogous to a novel where you've got like a 10-hour, 12-hour audiobook.
Do American soap operas scratch the same itch in their predictability and tropes? No.
No, because they're written an episode at a time, trying to like keep the story
And they
going.
go for like 10 years.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you want to tell us a little bit about where it is with the TV option?
I don't know. Can I do that?
Have you
Is that
convinced?
okay?
Not mention any names.
So we're in negotiations. Let's do that.
But they are doing the whole story, not just the K-drama.
Yes, yeah.
Unfortunately.
Mhm.
I wanted to talk about the ending a little bit, though I don't want to give anything away for any of you who haven't read the book. But in the rave review in the Washington Post from Ron Charles, He called the way that you bring together all the disparate parts of this book a, quote, remarkable feat of artistic prowess that somehow blends the themes of K-drama with the spectacle of sports drama in a way that resets our frame of reference for the Korean-American experience.
Yeah, that's
What
a
a
good quote.
review! Can you talk about what you were trying to do with the ending? I think it's a bold move.
Without telling you what it is. Let's test the powers of rhetoric.
I mean,
here.
you know, I was thinking a lot about how I've heard you say that when you have an ending that ties everything neatly with a bow, then the reader can kind of close the book and put it aside and it's over. But when you
Yeah.
have an open-ended ending, the story kind of works its way into the reader's mind, and you carry it with you. So maybe.
Yeah, sure. It's a good prompt. So I've written like some craft essays about this, where thinking about how, like in a kind of typical story of resistance, like the Hunger Games or something, when we get to the end and the resistance has happened, or some other kind of like a dystopian novel, and the world has changed for the better, I never leave that feeling like, let's start a revolution. I feel like, yes.
It's done.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. You know, like you feel a lot of kind of relief, and you feel like something has happened, but you aren't really a part of it, right? And so I do think that, like, as I am, you know, going through this process of trying to become a better writer, and I'm often thinking, like, how do I change the way I'm writing so that it can have some kind of effect that will, like, springboard into reality. Hence the title, right, of the craft book. And so I wanted this book both to kind of like provide a frame of reference for a kind of story, but then also like encourage somebody to take that way of storytelling and apply it maybe to their own life, but also to, you know, other stories. So I guess that's where I'll vague talk it to the end.
And it'll make more sense once you read the book. So I'm sure all of you will have questions, but we're going to do a speed round. Oh. Surprise. Well, so that give you all a little bit of time to think of your questions. Okay, so here we go.
Oh, okay.
You and I will
we
do
are
a
doing
speed
the
round.
speed
Oh,
round. I
yes,
thought we
no.
were gonna like have like speed dates or something.
You and I will do a speed round, and then when we conclude the speed round, we'll take some audience questions.
Okay,
Is that
okay.
good? Okay.
Cool, okay.
Okay,
I've never
so-
done this before.
Here we go. UConn or UNC?
UNC.
Jeremy Lin or Carmelo Anthony?
Lynn, of course. Yeah.
What do you love most about New York City?
The convenience.
What do you miss most about Stillwater, Oklahoma?
Oh God, did I miss anything? I miss my students.
Best book you've read this past year?
I don't know if I can say that. Well, because it was well, let's just say I'm reading through Alison Rose, or you can say it 'cause it's French, on audiobook. So,
Oh.
which, you know, Runaway right now is probably my favorite of
Oh,
the
yeah.
section.
That's a good one. Fill in the blank. If I weren't a writer, I'd be
Dead. I don't know.
Did not expect that. Okay, good. What is your life motto?
Take responsibility.
Oh, okay. Thank you for doing that. And round of applause for Matt and his wonderful. Questions?
Oh, I.
No, I just want to ask, you're somebody who's so well known for their writing, but also known as such a great teacher by so many different people. So, like, how do you make the balance? Like, I always find with the teaching, it's like sometimes when I'm teaching full time, it's like such a big part of writing. Like, I have to find time to push one aside for a while or push the other aside.
Could everyone hear that? Okay, great.
Oh, I think you're supposed to repeat it for the.
Oh, okay. So how Matt is such a great writer and also such a great teacher.
That's all I want.
Did you really need to repeat that?
Yeah,
How does he find balance between writing and teaching?
Yeah, it's hard. I think what you're saying, Hannah, right? It's a hard thing to do, and I'm constantly seeking better ways to do it. But I do, of course, learn a lot just from always being around fiction and talking about fiction. I think that's definitely something. It's more like the energy, maybe, right? Like the energy they use for teaching is close enough to the energy that you're using when you're writing that it can kind of like take up some of that room. And I think for me it's more about like I don't actually write much on the days that I teach. And the days when I'm not teaching, I try to do the writing first so that like I'm using, the early brain power on that and then trying to do the rest within that time frame. I've also tried to like make the teaching more of an interactive thing with the students, and less of me like typing notes on my computer, because I think that also is a way that it kind of like sucks up your energy. And I find that I kind of get the most energy out of teaching when I'm just talking to a student one-on-one. I don't know if that's really a satisfactory answer, but
I'll ask a random question. Came here on a whim, didn't know who you were. Sounds like an
Welcome.
awesome. What inspired you to write for the first time?
What inspired you to write for the first time?
I'm not sure. I think I have these pet theories about why people become writers. And one is like there's so many people who are in my writing classes who at some point when they were kids felt like I don't have control over the narrative of who I am. Right? And on the page you have, the most control you probably can have, because you decide every single word, right? Sometimes when you're young, you decide every single letter. I love to see my 6-year-old spelling or trying to spell and then asking what the words mean, and that's probably a big part of it for me. But I remember early on, I think this is probably the best thing I've ever written. I wrote a book about a stingray with a top hat who had like a shiny star in his smile, but then he lost it. And so he had to go looking for the shine in his smile so that he could get it back. I'm still trying to write a book that good.
How old were you when you wrote that?
I think it was 4th grade, maybe. It was illustrated too, and for some reason the book was in the shape of a leaf. I'm not really sure why.
That's a very bold artistic choice.
Yeah,
No, but I remember, when you showed up to grad school, you had like a 300-page novel draft that you had rewritten 3 times already. And so you kind of never lost focus along the way, even though you were living all over the world and doing different things.
Yeah, I think that's why I said dead for the. I don't know what I would be doing because it's like the only thing that I actually can do, and the only thing I really had interest in doing since pretty early on.
I have like a half-formed question, but I guess leading up to this event, some of my coworkers and I were just talking about how infrequent it is to have a work of contemporary fiction that's also about sports and that's also we're excited. I guess my question is, how did you approach like writing about sports and basketball specifically, which has such, a strong yet niche following in a way? I guess not niche and small, but niche in that like the people who love it are just like so dedicated to it. So I guess I would just love to know, how you approached writing about basketball in a way that would be, accessible and exciting to any old, regular person.
Or did you care that it would be? Oh, sorry, I have to repeat that. How did you go about writing a basketball novel, which has basketball has such a intense following? How did you go about writing that for a general audience? And then my kind of follow up was, did you care if a general audience got it?
Yeah, no, I guess I wasn't really concerned with what the audience would think of the basketball per se, as much as I was concerned with trying to make K-drama understandable as a kind of story form. So the K-drama kind of has much more explanation around it. And the basketball has much less. But the part of the basketball that I thought would be interesting on the page is the part that I find more interesting now, which is like all the drama surrounding basketball and the ways in which when you play, you can kind of feel the drama on the court, right? Like you can feel the energy shifting. And, you know, I was just talking about this with somebody recently where it's like basketball always comes in these spurts, right? It's like one team goes up, the other team goes up. Unless it's a complete blowout, it's kind of like a back and forth. And one team just kind of starts getting more desperate, and the other team starts, you know, resting a little bit. And you can really feel that when you're playing. I played basketball for a long time, and it was almost like you could tell what was happening, but you felt powerless in some way to stop it. And then there's also like the drama of the different personalities going on. That was always kind of a factor when I was playing. You never really lose sight of the fact that some people have more power on the team than others. And then you've got the coach who usually is some kind of tyrant directing the team. And when I watch the NBA, I'm often kind of like following the stories about where the players will go, you know, like what drama they have with the coaches. And those stories are really interesting to me. And even when I'm watching the game, I'm thinking about how that's kind of affecting the flow. And so that's the stuff I kind of put in the novel. And I think the general drama of that is pretty interesting, whether you like, you know, enjoy the way somebody dribbles or not. Which I do.
Yeah, I know you do. You clearly know a lot about both. And you remember when you asked me to blurb it, my facetious blurb was, I know nothing about basketball and I loved this book, which I did. I had no idea. I had no idea about all the kind of the power plays and also the interpersonal dramas. And then when I watched the Michael Jordan documentary on Netflix, like, wow, and now I understand.
It became personal.
Of it. Yeah, for sure.
How did you go about putting together the basketball parts of the story and the K-drama parts of the story? Did you always know they were going to be together, or were they two separate projects you had to fuse? How was that?
Yeah, I knew they were going to.
I'll just repeat it quickly. How did you go about putting together the basketball part of the novel and the K-drama parts? Did you always know they would go together, or did you have to kind of fuse them together?
Yeah, I kind of always knew that they would be parts of the novel, both of them. And, you know, like for me, in my head, I was always calling this Love and Basketball, right? And then, you know, there's a good movie, which kind of ruined it for me. But, so I knew that they were still like going to be parts of the same story, and also that, you know, for me, I was kind of tracking desire in both of these things. And so I was kind of trying to make sure that the things that were happening were caused, you know, on either side by these, like the desire that people had and the stories that we tell ourselves about desire and the stories, you know, that are told about our desire and what desires we're expected to have or allowed to have.
As a follow-up question to that, on the basketball side of the story, in addition to the team members and the coach, there's also this really interesting character who is the sports writer, who is a kind of doppelganger for Won. He's a Korean-American sports writer who was a Division II basketball star. Was he always a part of the book, or did he come in later?
Yeah, no, he was a part of the book from the very beginning. I don't know if I show you remember this, but I think I sent like a quick outline early on when we were deciding whether to work together. And it was the first thing I wrote about the novel, and it was maybe like 2 pages in which I was just kind of thinking about the relationship that Carrie calls a love triangle between Won and Robert Sung, who's the sports journalist who was kind of in Won's position in high school, and the star of the next Powerball.
Mm-hmm. I'll ask another question while people are still thinking about it. I know your editor is here, Vivian, and that the two of you have worked on all of your books, three of your novels together, and I think that's so rare in publishing. And so if you could talk a little bit about your relationship with your editor and how you work together.
Yeah, I Vivian hilarious. Vivian has a hilarious expression on right now. If you're watching on YouTube. It's like, please praise me, which I will gladly do. Vivian is amazing, and I think we work together really well. And I couldn't imagine I mean, even when I was writing the book, I was thinking Vivian's gonna love this.
Well, she's
book.
a huge basketball
Yes,
fan. for one.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I kind of had that in my back pocket. And yeah, I mean, it's so rare to have, you're right, like just have any
Yeah.
editor, but also like to have one of like 5 Asian American editors.
Yeah.
And Vivian is obviously the best.
Has your working style changed over the years? It's been like 10 years. When did your first book come out? 2014?
So the first book we did together came out in 2015.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know, math?
7 years.
8 years? 8 years?
Yeah. 8 years.
No, I was thrown off by the math, and now I can't even remember. What was the question?
Whether your how your working style has changed over the years.
Oh, yes. Okay. So I think there were probably much more edits in the first book that we did together. And, you know, at the beginning, it was kind of like we were trying to feel each other out, or I was trying to feel Vivian out. And so I had to kind of make a leap of trust to figure out that I was, you know, could listen to her. And a lot of like what she was saying early on helped me to understand that she would, you know, going to make good suggestions for me. And then I still ended up like changing the novel so much from the time that I got her edits to the time that she saw the revision, the first revision, that I felt like, oh no, like Vivian's gonna think she bought a totally different book because it came back so different. But then she loved it, and now I don't think this went through, or Vivian didn't give me as much, as many notes on the book, and I maybe just kind of trusting or knowing that I would just screw it up myself and remake it on my own. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about what you're working on now? I don't typically ask this, but I happen to know that he's working on something really interesting. So what?
Oh boy, this is gonna help me because I'm supposed to be working on a memoir in essays. But what I was actually working on
Right, that's true.
is a novel about an Asian American revenge cult, which from the beginning of Korean Americans officially entering the country has been taking revenge on bad people, bad white people mostly. So that is what I was working on.
A high school girl.
So it's told from point of view of at the beginning of the book, a 12-year-old girl who's being bullied pretty ruthlessly, and she's not one to take it lying down. And she finds out that her parents are part of this cult, and she's kind of inspired to take revenge. And it turns out that the family of her bully is also kind of involved in this much larger. It's a K-drama. It's a revenge.
It's the fruition of all your desires.
Yes, yeah.
It's fantastic. I've been lucky to read early drafts. Any other questions?
Okay, yeah, then everyone let's give a huge round of applause. As I said earlier, Matt's going to be around to sign and personalize books. My coworker Kevin in the back will be coming around with sticky notes for the personalizations. So we'll get that started soon. We ask that you do form an orderly line so that we can start to clear and rearrange the space. Otherwise, we've got plenty of additional books available for purchase tonight, as well as Kirstin's most recent book, Counterfeit. If you're still on the YouTube live stream, you can click the link in the description to buy the book. Otherwise, let's give these two writers one last round of applause.
So I've also brought audiobooks of old